Welcome back. We're continuing on with aircraft systems, specifically the type of small aircraft engines. This is Flight Instructor Nick. Induction systems. The induction system brings in air from the outside, mixes it with fuel, and delivers the fuel air mixture to the cylinder where the combustion occurs. Outside air enters the induction system through an intake port on the front of the engine cowling. This port normally contains an air filter that inhibits the entry of dust and other foreign objects, since the filter may occasionally become clogged. An alternate source of air must be available. Usually the alternate air comes from inside the engine cowling, where it bypasses a clogged air filter. Some alternate air sources function automatically while others operate manually. There are two types of induction systems that are commonly used in small aircraft engines. The carburetor system mixes the fuel and air in the carburetor before the mixture enters the intake manifold. The fuel injection system mixes the fuel and air immediately before entry into each cylinder, or injects fuel directly into each cylinder. Carburetor systems, aircraft carburetors, are separated into two categories: flow-type carburetors and pressure-type carburetors. Flow-type carburetors, complete with idling, accelerating, mixer control, idle cutoff, and power enrichment systems, are the most common of the two carburetor types. Pressure-type carburetors are usually not found on small aircraft. The basic difference between a flow-type and a pressure-type carburetor is delivery of fuel. The pressure-type carburetor delivers fuel under pressure by a fuel pump. In the operation of the flow-type carburetor system, the outside air first flows through the air filter, usually located at an air intake in the front part of the engine cowling. This filter air flows into the carburetor and through a venturi, a narrow throat in the carburetor. When the air flows through the venturi, a low pressure area is created that forces the fuel to flow through a main fuel jet located at the throat. The fuel then flows into the airstream, where it is mixed with the flowing of air. As previously mentioned with the induction systems, the flow-type carburetor, the fuel air mixture is then drawn through the air intake manifold and into the combustion chambers where it is ignited. The flow-type carburetor, it's named from a float that rests on a fuel within the float chamber. A needle attached to the float opens and closes an opening at the bottom of the carburetor bowl. This meters the amount of fuel entering into the carburetor, depending upon the position of the float, which is controlled by the level of the fuel in the float chamber. When the level of the fuel forces the float to rise, the needle valve closes the fuel opening and shuts off the fuel flow to the carburetor. The needle valve opens again when the engine requires additional fuel. The flow of the fuel air mixture to the combustion chambers is regulated by the throttle valve, which is controlled by the throttle in the flight cockpit or flight deck. And here is your flow type carburetor, fuel to air mixture, throttle valve, the venturi, that narrow neck that we were talking about, venturi discharge nozzle right there, the float chamber within here, the fuel inlet, the fuel itself. In a Cessna, it'd be 100 low lead, which is typically colored light blue, the mixture needle, the air bleed, and the air inlet. That concludes the flow type carburetor, and the next lesson will be covering fuel injection system. Thanks for joining. See you next flight.